Try this. Hold something in your hand, a glass of water, a pen, a key. Hold it and look at it, really look at it, and say its name aloud. Say it again and again. Say it until the syllables turn into noise, until the word becomes a clump of sounds that tumble out of your mouth like wet gravel, and watch what happens. The object does not change, it does not move. But something in the space between your mind and the thing begins to shudder. The label lifts, the name peels away, and what is left is not a glass, not a pen, not a key. What is left is a thing. A cold, hard, silent, terrifying thing that exists without your permission, without your understanding, without any reason at all. It simply is. And you are holding it, and you cannot put it down fast enough because for one flickering, nauseating second, you felt the whole architecture of your named, sorted, labeled world tremble on its foundations. That is where we begin. That is where Antoine Roquentin begins. In the coastal town of Bouville, a fictional nowhere, a place that smells of salt and stone and slow municipal decay, Roquentin is a man writing a historical biography, sitting in cafes, walking through parks, doing the unremarkable things that unremarkable days demand. But something is happening, something underneath. The world is beginning to leak through its definitions. A pebble on the beach feels wrong in his hand, not because it is sharp or hot or unusual, but because it is there, because it presses against his palm with an insistence that defies the word pebble, that overflows the concept stone, that sits in his grip like a small, mute accusation from reality itself. He drops it, he wipes his hand, but the feeling does not leave, it spreads. And Sartre, the architect of this dread, is not describing a man who is depressed. He is describing a man who is waking up. Nausea is not a psychological disorder in this book. It is not melancholy. It is not ennui dressed in French clothing. It is a biological reaction, a revolt of the body against a world that refuses to justify itself. Roquentin's stomach turns not because life is sad, but because life is gratuitous, because the existence of every object, every person, every moment is utterly, ferociously contingent. That word is the black heart of Sartre's ontology. It means that nothing has to be here. Not the bench, not the rain, not us. Everything that exists could just as easily not exist. There is no script. There is no author. There is no backstage where a cosmic stagehand checks the props before sending them into the light. Things simply appear, persist for a while, and vanish. And none of it is required by any law deeper than brute facticity. The universe did not need to produce this planet. This planet did not need to produce life. Life did not need to produce consciousness. And yet here we are, thrown into the thickness of existence, without an invitation, without a manual, without even the courtesy of an explanation. Sartre draws a line through the history of Western philosophy and arrives at a distinction that vibrates through every page of the novel. There is being in itself, the en soi, the massive, opaque, self-identical existence of things. A rock is a rock, a root is a root. They do not question themselves. They do not anguish over their purpose. They simply are, solidly, dumbly, completely. And then there is being for itself, the pure soi, the kind of being that we are. Consciousness, the thing that is always aware of itself, always at a distance from itself, always asking what it is, and never arriving at an answer. We are the crack in being. We are the nothing that slithers into the heart of the world and demands meaning from a world that has none to give. And the nausea, Roquentin's nausea, is what happens when that demand is finally, irrevocably denied. Consider the self-taught man, the autodidacta, one of the most quietly devastating figures in the novel. He sits in the Bouville library every day, reading every book on every shelf in strict alphabetical order. He has reached the letter L, or perhaps M, and he is methodical, earnest, humble. He believes that if he reads enough, if he consumes enough knowledge, he will arrive somewhere. He will become educated, he will become complete. He is a humanist, he tells Roquentin with a gentle pride, and he loves humanity. But Sartre does not present him with tenderness. Sartre presents him as a man building a fortress out of index cards. The autodidact's project is not learning, it is insulation. He is wrapping himself in the alphabet the way a child wraps itself in a blanket during a thunderstorm, believing that if he can just organize enough of the world into categories and sequences, the terrifying formlessness underneath will stay hidden. He is collecting information the way we collect credentials, followers, curated identities, algorithmic profiles, carefully arranged bookshelves photographed at the right angle, playlists that signal depth, opinions borrowed from podcasts we half heard during a commute. He is performing the act of knowing in order to avoid the experience of being. And when his project collapses, when the library expels him for reasons too human and too pitiful to recount without wincing, the collapse is not just social, it is ontological. The alphabetical shield shatters, and the void it was holding back does not politely wait. Then there are the salades, the bastards, the swine. Roquentin finds them in the portrait gallery of the Bouville Museum, those thick-necked, self-satisfied men of commerce and civic virtue who stare down from gilt frames with the absolute certainty that they belong here, that the world was arranged for their benefit, that their titles and their properties and their stern, well-fed faces are proof of a cosmic order that placed them at the top. They are the ones who have never felt the nausea because they have never allowed a crack in the performative veneer. Their existence is a closed loop of self-congratulation. They name themselves leader, founder, patron, father. And they believe those names are not descriptions but essences, that they were born to be what they are, that their lives are justified by their importance. Roquentin looks at them and feels something between rage and pity, because he sees what they cannot see, that their portraits are paint on canvas, that their names are sounds in the air, that their importance is a story they tell themselves with such ferocity that they have mistaken the telling for reality. The salades are not villains. They are the logical conclusion of a species that cannot bear to look at its own contingency. They are us on our best days, the days when we feel that our job title, our relationship status, our political opinions, our carefully constructed narrative of who we are actually means something fixed, something necessary, something that could not be otherwise. The nausea is what waits on the other side of that belief. And then there is the tree, the chestnut tree in the public garden. This is the scene that breaks everything open, that turns a novel into a philosophical event, that makes Roquentin and Sartre and the reader all fall through the same trapdoor at the same moment. Roquentin sits on a bench and looks at the root of the chestnut tree, a black, knotty, gnarled thing pushing out of the earth, and something happens. The word root stops working. It peels off the thing like wet wallpaper. And what is underneath is not a root, it is not a tree, it is not nature. It is a massive existence, raw, obscene, absurd, bulging with a presence so thick and so unjustified that it feels almost pornographic. The root exists with a kind of aggressive, stupid insistence. It is too much. Sartre uses the phrase de trop, superfluous, excessive, and it is the perfect word because it captures not just the intellectual realization but the physical revulsion. The root is too much. The park is too much. The sky is too much. Existence is not sparse or elegant or meaningful. It is bloated, sticky, glutinous. It presses against consciousness like a tongue pressing against the roof of a mouth. And Roquentin understands, in a flash of horror that is also a flash of absolute clarity, that there is no reason for any of it. Not the tree, not the park, not the city, not himself. Everything is here for no reason, remains here for no reason, and will vanish for no reason. The simulation of meaning, the thin film of language and habit and social ritual that we stretch over the surface of reality to make it bearable, has ruptured, and what pours through the rupture is not darkness, not evil, not chaos. It is just existence. Pure, thick, meaningless existence. And that is worse than any darkness could ever be, because darkness at least implies something missing. This is not missing anything. This is everything, all at once, with nothing to organize it, nothing to justify it, nothing to make it make sense. This is the moment when Roquentin becomes a stranger to himself. Not in the poetic sense, not in the sense of a man who has lost touch with his feelings, but in the most literal, most terrifying sense possible. He looks at his own hand and does not recognize it. He looks at his own face in the mirror and sees flesh arranged in a pattern that could just as easily be otherwise. The identity he has carried, the name Antoine Roquentin, the biography, the habits, the preferences, all of it revealed as a thin paper mask over a black, vibrating abyss of pure being. He is not someone, he is something. And the difference between those two words is the difference between sleeping and waking, between comfort and the cold sweat of a consciousness that has seen too much. But Sartre does not leave us there. Or rather, he leaves us there, but he offers one narrow, trembling plank across the abyss, the jazz song. Roquentin sits in a cafe, and a recording plays, an old song, Some of These Days, sung by a voice that comes through the static and the scratch of the needle with a clarity that cuts through everything. And for a moment, the nausea recedes, not because the music is beautiful, though it is, not because it distracts him, though it does, but because the music has something that existence does not. It has necessity. Every note follows the previous note, not by accident, but by design. The melody could not be otherwise. It exists in a realm where things belong, where sequence implies purpose, where each element justifies the next. Art, Sartre suggests, is the one human act that escapes contingency, because a work of art, once created, possesses an internal logic that the world itself lacks. The song does not exist de trop. The song exists perfectly, completely, inevitably. And Roquentin, hearing it, wonders if this is the answer. If creating something, writing something, composing something with the rigor and the necessity of that melody might be the only honest response to a world that refuses to explain itself. This is not a happy ending. Sartre would spit at a happy ending. It is barely even hope. It is more like a hypothesis offered at the edge of an abyss. A man saying, perhaps I could write a book, a novel, something that would be beautiful and hard as steel, something that would make people ashamed of their existence. It is not salvation, it is a dare aimed at the very formlessness that has been swallowing him whole. And the dare is this: if the world will not provide meaning, then we must invent it, not discover it, not uncover it, not pray for it, but build it out of nothing, knowing that it is built out of nothing, knowing that the ground beneath it is the same sticky, superfluous, nauseating mass of being that the chestnut root revealed. We must make meaning the way a sculptor makes a figure from stone, not because the figure was hiding inside the stone all along, but because the sculptor decided it would be there. And this is where we land. Not in comfort, not in reassurance, in the full, unflinching weight of what Sartre is telling us. We are unjustified. Our presence here, in these bodies, on this planet, reading these words, breathing this air, is not required by anything. No cosmic law demanded us. No divine architect drafted our blueprints. We are accidents of matter and time, thrown into a world that was not expecting us and will not mourn us when we leave. And the names we have given to everything, the words we use to tame the roaring silence of things, tree, chair, love, purpose, self, are not truths, they are agreements. Fragile, human agreements that we maintain through repetition and ritual and the quiet conspiracy of pretending together that the world makes sense. The nausea is what happens when the conspiracy fails. When we look at the root, and the root looks back, and neither of us knows what we are. When we catch our own reflection and see not a person but a strange, wet, temporary arrangement of cells performing a character that no one wrote. When the linguistic cage we have built around reality rusts and bends and something unnameable pushes through the bars. But here is the liberation inside the horror, the cold, exhilarating, almost unbearable liberation. If nothing is necessary, then nothing is forbidden. If there is no script, then there is no wrong line. If existence precedes essence, as Sartre will later declare with the force of a manifesto, then we are radically, terrifyingly, magnificently free. Free to fail, free to create. Free to look at the abyss and answer it, not with faith, not with ideology, not with the curated surface of a life designed to be envied, but with a single, stubborn, human act of making something that was not there before. The nausea is the price of that freedom. It is the tax levied on every consciousness that dares to be honest about the nature of its own existence. And we can pay it, or we can join the salords in the portrait gallery and pretend that our names are carved in stone. Sartre has shown us the alternative. The chestnut root is still there, black and knotted, and utterly without excuse, pushing out of the earth with the blind, obscene persistence of everything that exists. The question is not whether we can bear to look at it. The question is what we will make once we have.